I'd like you to join with me in welcoming our opening keynote, Professor Neil Lawrence. I'm going to get his title right. He's the DeepMind Professor of Machine Learning at the University of Cambridge. Neil, thank you.
Thank you, Amanda, for that great introduction. So, as Amanda says, there's a lot of technical difficulty with AI, and supposedly I am an AI expert. But I've sort of noticed that most of the conversations we're having around AI seem to be led by people who are not expert in AI. So I thought I'd take a leaf out of their book and mainly talk about something other than AI. But it's actually a lot about you. Now, the original title is supposed to be The Open Society and Its AI, but it is a nod to this book by Popper. And so I'm going to start by talking about lots of things I don't know much about. Let's talk about classics. So I want to start by talking about Socrates. Because like a while ago, I was going to be introduced for a talk, and I just knew I was going to be introduced by ChatGPT. And I thought, well, how do I respond to that? And there's this amazing story of Socrates, who defended himself in front of 501 citizens of Greece for his life against charges of corrupting the youth of Athens. And he chose not to write his talk down. And he railed against the use of writing, because he sort of said it's cheating, that you shouldn't be using sound bites, you should be using dialogue. And I thought that's quite interesting. So that's why I've got no slides and very few technical aids, because I think talking off the cuff like that is quite powerful, and that's what Socrates was saying. Now, Socrates was saying that about 400 years after the Greeks had rediscovered writing. Because the Greeks, up until about the time of Homer, they had linear A script, which they used only for administration, not for poetry. But then they forgot how to write. And then about 400 years before Socrates, they learned how to write again from the Phoenicians. Now, that's important because when Socrates was talking about writing, he was talking about something that was relatively new in his society. So the time difference between their rediscovery of writing and Socrates' time is roughly the same as the time difference between the Renaissance and us. So if we look back in time about Newton, that sort of period. And one of the challenges I think we face in our society is something that emerged, that I think we all believe it is an amazing thing, that scientific enlightenment, a period of discovery of a notion of reductionism. Reductionism, where we take systems and we reduce them to very simple components, and we say that the components of that system are entirely driven by these simple laws. And broadly speaking, that is true. That's why it dominates our society. But the problem is, it has overtaken our thinking to such an extent that we start believing the complexity of society, the challenges of society, the problems we face socially, health, education, security, are addressed by reductionist principles. And this is highly problematic. And that's where the sort of title comes from. Because around about the time 80 years ago, when Popper was in exile in New Zealand from Austria, which was the heart of thinking about liberal democracy until the Nazi Anschluss, he wrote a book that talks about the open society and its enemies. And I think this community reflects the spirit of that book. Because what Popper says is, if you look back to Greece, if you look back to Plato's Republic, if you look back to theories of how politics work, they all have this sort of, I mean, there's no other way of putting it, this sort of great man idea, this reductionist idea that some great leader leads society forward. And Popper says no. Popper says that is not true. That the way the open society works is through piecemeal social engineers. Piecemeal social engineers, people like yourselves, who just try and operate within the best interests of society, who are distributed across society, across our institutions, our legal institutions. Thank goodness we do not do trials today in front of the citizens of our cities where 501 people vote whether someone's going to live or die. We have legal institutions to replace that. Thank goodness we have institutions of journalism. And this is what Popper's talking about, that society sort of doesn't work in a way where there's some reductionist idea underpinning it. It's a series of piecemeal engineers who are empowered to deliver the solutions we need through their knowledge and their understanding of their small segment of society. It is so complex, no one person can deal with it. We do not have an ability to solve health. What we have is a collection of doctors, of nurses, nurses, of patients, of scientists, of pharmaceutical companies, hopefully incentivized to work together in the right way to deliver those solutions. Now, what's that got to do with AI? And what's that got to do with technology? Well, we hold in great store the sort of Greek civilization because its script became our script. But it's not the original script. And what I'm holding in my hand is my one piece of technology today. It's a little cuneiform tablet that stems from 1500 BC. And what it is basically a little Excel spreadsheet that gives the yield of a bunch of fields in the city of Nippur. The invention of writing came about because societies needed ways of storing and sharing information to administer their societies. If you're an accountant, you can be very pleased because this is a wonderful statement that writing was invented by accountants, not poets. It was invented as an administrative tool. And all of those professions I'm talking about emerge out of the wave of capabilities that built on that administrative tool. So the profession of the scribe, they were the only people in these very ancient societies who could create and read the writing on these tablets. It was quite a complex form of writing. It involved pictograms, rebus writing, a number of different things, much more complex than our writing today. The reason that the Greeks, that literature flourished with the Greeks, is because they inherited a simplified form of writing from the Phoenicians, who were traders, who'd already reduced the complexity of writing. And of course, that has an amazing effect on European society, because 1800 years after Socrates, when the printing press is developed, we can produce printed material, we can distribute this material in such a way that literacy improves across the whole of Europe. Now, that literacy improvement does not come without its challenges, right? You're dealing with a society which was administered mainly by the Catholic Church. The people who could read and write, the scribes of 1430s, were typically monks, people educated, for example, at the institution I'm at, Queen's College now, people who are subscribed to a certain set of beliefs and administered society according to those beliefs. So when it comes to the change in information infrastructure that we all benefit today, which was the opening up of that writing to the general population, we're looking at a massive social change, a massive change in security, massive improvements in health and education, but massive disruption to our societies, including, 80 years ago, the rise of fascism. Now, what we're looking at today is highly problematic, because what we're hearing from at the moment is the new guilds, because the new form of information infrastructure is software and the computer. You all know that because you are all engaged in that process. But the people who have the power and who are owning the conversation at the moment are the guilds of those software engineers who would like to keep that closed and within their own power so that they can continue to maintain their hold over society. Now, my best analogy for this is something that came out around about the same time as Popper's Open Society and Its Enemies, which is the Disney film Fantasia. So there's one section in that film where they use Paul Ducas's music to The Sorcerer's Apprentice. Now, the story of The Sorcerer's Apprentice is the story of an apprentice sorcerer who learns a spell from his master and uses that spell to start delivering on his chores. Now, that doesn't go very well, and it's a wonderful poem. It's originally in German, and I've tried to remember what the sorcerer eventually says when he comes back and the sorcerer has made this entire mess trying to use this spell for his swords. There's water everywhere. There's brooms trying to move these buckets. And the sorcerer says, Besen, Besen, soll's gewesen, which is, brooms, brooms, stop it. And the brooms stop. Well, the modern sorcerer's apprentice is Sam Altman. The modern sorcerer's apprentice is Mark Zuckerberg. And if you don't believe me, look in 2019 where he writes an op-ed in the Washington Post saying, please regulate us because we don't know what we're doing. Now, I was on a panel with Jan, who's a friend and someone I greatly admire, but he said, well, when we asked that question, what was the answer? He said, crickets. I said, what, the English sport? And he said, no, the American expression, they said nothing. Why did they say nothing? Because they've been utterly disempowered. The piecemeal social engineers that Popper talked about that manage and support our society. We saw it in the Horizon scandal. There's a quote from Joe Holloway in the sort of dramatization of that. I can't understand, are they evil or incompetent? The answer is neither. They are professional people who are disempowered by an entire shift of the information infrastructure that they are used to manipulating with one that they have no access to, and it is controlled by companies like Fujitsu, or like Microsoft, or like Google. Now, I don't want to dispute the utility that these companies bring to us and the great products they sometimes ship. But what I want to dispute is a world where they are in charge, because they are not the sorcerer, they are the apprentice. Unfortunately, the sorcerer is a distributed system of institutions that Popper described in The Open Society and Its Enemies. And the challenge is that unless we address this, unless we address a moment of steerage we're at right now, AI becomes the enemy. It becomes an existential threat, not in technical terms, but in social terms. And the danger we're looking at right now is our government has become obsessed with the technical threat and not the social threat. And the urgent thing we need to do is re-empower the institutions of our society. And if the UK can't do this, who can? Because we have the agility, we have the capability, we have a community like this, which we need to use to help support those people. And we now have the technology, because while LLMs do present new challenges for society, they also present new opportunities. And those opportunities are pretty much equivalent to the opportunity that the printing press presented us with, where we can now democratize this technology. And I'm afraid I foresee a future where you, as software engineers and technical experts, are not the ones in charge, that we're returning the control to the people who understand the domains best, the doctors, the nurses, the lawyers, the accountants, the regular people, the people working currently in call centers, so that they can steer this technology to deliver the type of lives we need. And the reason you are the right community to do this is because of everything Amanda was just saying about that term community. Look at her apologizing, oh, I'm sorry, we got a few things wrong in that submission to evidence, because she knows that you are all engaged and all feel passionate about that. So you are not just a technical system, you are much more importantly a social ecosystem. And it's with your social ecosystem and these approaches to technological advance, which are not just pure open source. There are new forms of open access that the Lord's report did talk about that we need to understand and push forward. That is the answer. That is how we will band together and shout together, Besen, Besen, Zerz gewesen, and return the open society to its people. Thank you.